Nothing Personal starts in 30 seconds. It's just business. This is Nothing Personal. Pablo Torre. That's the Nothing Personal word of the day. It's a Samson sit down. And yes, he's a friend of the show. Yes, he now has the record for the most sit downs. But we do so many things together that I am honored and happy anytime we can spend time with Pablo. Hello, Pablo.
This is me fist pumping. I didn't realize I was also accepting the honor of being the most sat down person for a Samson sit down.
This is that you now have taken the lead. I assume it's a lead you will never relinquish because doing shows with you, the audience loves it. We love it. So why wouldn't we just keep going?
We're out of the closet now, David. I feel like we had a week in Miami with Dominique, and we basically just had podcast, live radio intercourse, and everyone knows that we love doing this together. And so it's good to be here with you on the record in that way.
It is reminding me, didn't you start COVID in the closet?
I did. This is actually that closet.
Are you in the closet now?
Well, now it's a walk-in closet. So the wall got moved back. I have some new plants and stuff. So yeah, this is where I was. I am for those who are, and I'm not going to show this to you. I am at a standing desk. This is like, anyway, you get the picture. I'm at home.
Are you in your
closet.
skivvies?
I am. Yes.
Okay. So I have a quick suggestion for you in that I got caught in my skivvies one time because there was an issue with the camera that I had to adjust. And so I had to stand up and move something. And now I wear shorts instead of just whitey tighties.
Yeah. Look, neither of us are in danger of being tubined, as it's called in the medical profession.
Oh, that is so. He had such a great career. He's such a smart guy.
He wrote books about the Supreme Court.
And he's done now. Is he done?
No, he's poking his head out, as it were. But I would say that for a guy who is a scholar of the Supreme Court, like a New Yorker writer, this is a pretty good time to have that expertise. And he is, backbenched because of, the tubining, which is something that we, again, are not in danger of because gross.
So clearly we're talking about Jeffrey Toobin. And for those who don't know, he was a well-known legal analyst, I like to call him. He was measured, generally 4 inches or under, and he was totally fine. And one time on Zoom during COVID, he thought the camera was off, and we've seen these. And this is when I would send it to Coca and say, hey, is this real? Because I've seen a bunch since, but on camera, he started to pleasure himself. And it turns out the camera was on. He thought it was off. And this was in front of his coworkers. And he then did a apology tour. I don't know what the rehab is for that. Normally people go to rehab when they have to do an apology tour. Did he go to rehab? Like, what would it be? Sex rehab or?
It feels less like rehab and more like, can you just not? Can you just not?
Well,
can that just be like the class that you go to?
Because everyone does. So it's not that can you just not? It's that you have to have your camera off.
I mean, well, hold on though. Okay, I'm not gonna make you be the defendant in the case of the People versus Jeffrey Toobin.
I am not defending I'm defending the fact that he did what everyone either does or lies about doing. I'm saying that you can't be that stupid. You can't do what he did and do it publicly.
Yeah. At work, I would say would be the bright line that I'm going to draw. Just don't do it at work. And of course, the complication would be that work was home. As again, a person in their underwear talking to you, I get on some level the confusion, except for the bright line. But I beseech you to move on.
Well, once in a while, the bright line gets you, doesn't it? See, that's the thing with Pablo Torre finds out. Oh, I have so much to ask you about that. Let me start with this.
Okay.
When you started at Meadowlark, I was a part of conversations really all the time with you and talking to Dan Lebitard and John Skipper. And you had this idea for a show, and you've got a story career ready, and you're young. So you forget Harvard. We're not going to talk about it. Forget a journalist at Sports Illustrated and all the things you've done, the rewards you've won. You basically came to Meadowlark with a blank canvas. So walk me through, how did you invent and think about starting Pablo Torre Finds Out?
Yeah, I mean, look, the title in retrospect becomes a convenient unifying theory of the show, and it cleans up a lot of the mess that I believe I probably conveyed to you as I was wondering, what do I call this? How many times a week is it? What's the premise? How is it different? Because in retrospect, now the name Pablo Torre Finds Out is such the skeleton key to all of this. It's a show about my curiosity in which I use journalism to solve mysteries and talk to friends and learn about the world beyond sports, often technically about sports, but really about a lot more than that. That's the elevator pitch now, which is easier to make. But back then, it was a blank piece of paper. And it started with, John coming to me and saying, hey, we need a daily sports podcast. Will you host it for us? And my initial inclination was, I am very interested in this because I wanted to work with Dan and John, and because I wanted to have more editorial freedom over what I was doing with my podcast life, my podcast ambitions, being the host of ESPN Daily. And
I'm sorry, Pablo. I have to stop you there. Did you not have editorial freedom at ESPN? You were the host and the usual host of ESPN Daily, which was an extremely popular, high-rated podcast. Did you have to get all your stories cleared in a way you don't at Meadowlark?
No, I did. I was the managing editor of ESPN Daily. It's simply that our obligations were far more to what ESPN itself, the news gathering operation, the newsroom, was already doing. And so a lot of the times I would be using other people's reporting, which was cool. And by the way, on some level, a lot easier for me because I was basically just adapting other people's work. And in a related sense, I was not in control of what they were doing. So for me, I look, I loved doing that job, and it did have a degree of freedom editorially. But I also felt, and this is no shade to ESPN Daily at all, but I also felt a bit like a cruise director. Insofar, I've never been on a cruise. Related story.
So how do you know how a cruise director feels?
Because I've been told that a cruise director is the guy.
You use that?
Well, because I'm lathering myself up into a great metaphor, David. So a cruise director, insofar as I am sort of ginning up a smile and energy and enthusiasm for a journey that maybe I didn't chart myself. And so for me, doing that 5 days a week was tiring on the level of, I am curious about so much of what we're doing, but I'm not actually personally picking the curiosities. And so I wanted to do more of, hey, what if I charted the course myself? What if I was assigning people to do reporting? What if I was doing a lot more reporting myself? And all of which brought me back around to John and having to tell him, look,
John Skipper,
yes, CEO of Meadowlark Media, my former boss at ESPN. I was telling him, I understand why more shows is better than fewer shows when it comes to the economy of podcasting.
Harvard.
But I felt like 5 days a week would have been a recipe to do something that would have been even more unsustainable than what I designed, which is arguably, we can jump ahead to this point as well at some point, which is also hard to do and hard to keep up. And so for me, it was 3 days a week. And then it was, okay, 3 shows a week. What are we doing? I'm like, okay, I'm always going to want to do a deep dive in keeping with the whole like charting the course myself metaphor that I'm now going to club you over the head with.
Thank you.
And then it was, okay, I also love talking to my friends, and I love doing highly questionable on ESPN. And so what if I can do this with Dan and Mina and that rotation of people from HQ that I also got to work with over years on TV? Let's do that. Okay, that's 2 shows. And then it was, okay, so there's a third wildcard slot that's often, I think, going to logically be just me and another person sitting down talking to each other, more of a one-on-one sit-down style thing. And so that was the rough premise of it. And then the name came together, and it was like, oh, all of this is about my curiosity, and my energy level and my actual enthusiasm it's going to be the key to this feeling different and real, and not just like, a label you slapped on something. And so a long way of saying that it was a blank piece of paper that, the title of the show ended up crystallizing the vision for in ways that I only appreciate really almost a year later.
How hard is it for you? Because you're doing it 3 days a week. So let's assume, I don't know what Skipper and Levitard give you in terms of vacation, but I don't think we have the same agent at the moment. But let's pretend that you have to do, 47 to 48 weeks of shows somehow.
Yeah.
Is that roughly true? So 100, 230, 136, 156. What's the total number of shows you do per year that you will do?
I don't even know. All I know is that when it comes to vacation, we went, you, me, and John, separately, but then converging together, went to France. I was there doing a semi-work boondoggle thing for a week. I took that week off. I don't think I took any other vacation this year. So it doesn't happen a lot.
So when you look at PTFO, what would you say? First of all, what's the, out of the number of episodes you've done so far, rank them. Give me your top 3 episodes, your favorite 3 episodes.
Oh man.
So if people are new to your show, they can go to those 3 episodes to get an idea of what PTFO is.
Yeah, so I'll give you 3 examples, and I appreciate the opportunity to flog my wares here. As I also remember that we recorded a show on my vacation in France.
Yes,
we did a sporting class, so I'm like, okay. Anyway, I should take more vacation. Note to self. Okay, so 3 episodes as a bit of a poo-poo platter of what PTFO can be. So number 1, I'll start with the LeBron Knicks tape. Just because if you're not familiar with the story, I'll give you the very capsule summary of it. When the Knicks were courting LeBron James during the summer of 2010, this was the decision. James Dolan figured out a way to appeal to the most popular free agent in sports history, and he created a video tailor-made for LeBron featuring a bunch of his super friends. And it began to be this mythological video because no one had ever seen it. It was allegedly disappeared. It was rumored to be not actually real, even though people had sort of reported bits and pieces of it. And so we got this tape. It is 10 minutes long. It starts with a scene from, and again, spoiler
Don't
alert.
skip the interesting part, please. How did you get the tape? Well, did you think of the concept first? Like, oh, LeBron chose Miami. I wonder whether any other team tried to get him. Oh, maybe LeBron, the Knicks. Tell me how that works.
No, good producing by you. So the Knicks were the favorites to get LeBron heading into this whole derby of the summer. Of course, it ends with him taking his talents to South Beach. But the Knicks were the favorite. I, at this point, was a Knicks fan. I, at this point, was wondering, how the did the Knicks screw this up? And all I knew was that the Knicks contingent rolled in. LeBron was having all of these visitors, and you've done meetings like this, David, where you go and visit, you bring the mountain to Muhammad, right? And so like everybody visits him. It was at IMG, their building in Cleveland, I believe. And so it was all of these delegations. And so the Knicks delegation rolled in and rolled out, and the Knicks were promptly eliminated. And I was like, what happened in this meeting? And you began to hear about this video they showed LeBron. And the video, David,
you began to hear about it how? From Google?
Years ago, this was a thing that lots of sports writers sort of gossiped about. And again, there were sort of reports here and there that the Knicks played this video for LeBron and it didn't go well. It was like, well, hold on, what's on this video? How can you screw this up? What did the Knicks try to sell the biggest free agent of all time? And what it turned out that they sold was a number of things, but it begins with a true artifact of prestige television, which is before he died, James Gandolfini and Edie Falco filmed a secret sequel scene to The Sopranos about how they were finding an apartment for their friend LeBron. And so this video, I cannot stress enough how much of a deal this was in the Sopranos subreddit when I unearthed this tape, because it was a scene. It was a fully fledged scene of Tony Soprano as Tony Soprano, James Gandolfini, who did not ever want to play that role again, playing the role to court LeBron. And that is the peak of the video.
So you're doing this show trying to figure out, and so this is your number one. We're going to get to 2 and 3, but number one, go watch the episode about the LeBron tape.
LeBron
Pablo Torre
tape.
finds out. You can get it anywhere you get podcasts. It's on YouTube as well, on DraftKings Network as well. What interests me is that you didn't go into that, I assume, thinking that the story of that, the fame of that, would be the Sopranos part of the video. You thought what you were finding out was, hey, here's the video. Is that accurate?
I wanted the video. I wanted to prove that it was real. I wanted to see it, actually. And to get to your question of how I got it, I will never say who gave it to me or the multiple people who maybe gave it to me. But when I acquired it, it was one of those things that was like staring into the Ark of the Covenant, because here in order was this insane scene from The Sopranos into a lineup of James Dolan's friends. And I'll just tell you, just as a matter of like to whet the appetite, in case you have not somehow heard me talk about this, the first face you see after it goes from Fade to Black, Jay-Z montage, Donald Trump. Selling
before he was president.
Before he was president.
Before he was even a thought. He was the Celebrity Apprentice guy at that point.
Yeah, and he was Mr. New York and a friend of James Dolan. And so you go down the list of a murderer's row of people who could not have aged worse, I would argue. But they were the people that LeBron James met via his potential new employer in James Dolan. So anyway,
that's a good one. I've got so many questions about that episode.
I know.
Because it's a great episode. All right, number 2.
Okay, number 2. I wanted to solve the question, the riddle of like, how do I talk about trans athletes without people being exhausted? Because it's so moralizing, it's so overdone, everyone's arguing. And so the very premise of my curiosity was, what is it like to be a trans female athlete who is bad at sports? So what does this mean? It means you are not the Goliath that's been promised. You're not the caricature of athletic dominance. Yes, you were assigned male at birth, but then you went on to suck at sports. What is that even like? And it turned out in the state of Ohio, there was exactly one varsity high school athlete who was affected by the new laws that were passed that banned such athletes from competition. And that person, named Ember Zelch, was a third-string softball catcher who, by her own admission, sucks at softball. And so we went to Ohio. I
didn't even know they had 3 strings, Pablo, in high school.
Me neither.
That's like manager. I think that's the player manager of the team.
Had hit 0 home runs career, had no realistic shot at anything related to stealing someone else's trophy or scholarship or glory.
And you were finding out how they adjusted to being a transgender athlete in Ohio.
What's it like to be the target of a legislation that promises that you are something on an end of the spectrum on which you actually are at the opposite, and you are the one person who does it? And so this is a way to honestly, I wanted to figure out a way, how can we laugh at this as well as think about this? And Ember Zelch was incredibly self-effacing, was funny. Her and her mom brought me into their house, and we talked about how bad she is at the sport that she just wants to play to be included. And it was about like sports is not just trophy hunting, but also as a means of inclusion and community building. And so it was a reminder of like, who are the actual people in vanishingly small numbers that we're actually arguing about when it comes to the moral crusade about, trans athletes in reality. It was just a window into the real world in which there are fewer boogeymen, as it were, than were promised to us by lots of political figures.
Okay. 3. Okay. Final one. Make it good.
So I have 2 options here. I'm gonna give you the 1B or the 3B because you're not gonna be as into it, David. The 3B is Action Bronson, to whom I broke the news of Lauren Boebert giving a through the pants hand job to her partner at Beetlejuice the musical. I love that one so much.
Now it's a great episode. I spoiler alert, I've seen all the episodes that you're describing, but if you are trying to give people a thought of the show, I thought you were going to go a different direction. You were going to bring people to one of your Friday episodes where you do it with Dan and Mina, you have 2 people because I want people to sample the 3 different types of shows you have, because then they'll become addicted to it the way so many people have, which is why it wins awards and why you're so famous and so terrific. But I thought you were going to go with one of those.
Yeah, so we'll go with that for 3A. Me and Katie Nolan and Dan Soder, one of our first episodes.
From Succession.
From Billions.
Excuse me.
Billions.
Dan Soder's from Billions.
See, this is how good a host you are. I'm just like nodding along, like, yes, of course, Succession. No, he's from Billions. He's a stand-up. He's awesome. They do episodes with me as a couple. And the first, again, it's just funny. My nostalgia already goes back to the first one we ever did. It's the one where I took a trip to the U.S. Open, where clouds of weed smoke were wafting into Court 17 last
From
summer.
you?
Well, you'll see my reporting firsthand. I do engage in what George Plimpton engaged in, as it were. And I brought it back to Katie and Dan, and we riffed for a while. And that was just to me, that episode was a reminder of like, oh, okay, if I just talk to my friends, this is going to work. And so just infusing some sense of journalistic rigor with that spirit. And again, the very brief elevator pitch, which is not brief at all at this point, is simply, we do stupid things seriously and serious things stupidly. So we will investigate NBA ownership battles. We will investigate fencing, match fixing, controversies and scandals in the Olympics. Any episode I'm proud of, which is something that I'm very glad I can say. But those are just, again, some of the
How
things. How
deep would I have had to go? So this was a setup, obviously, and you failed it so miserably.
I know.
What was the number I needed to do? Like top 20, top 70, top 5?
Honestly,
like
top 129 at this point. I believe we're 129 in. Top 129.
So I would have had to say, hey, tell me your top 129. And eventually you'd have gotten to the one that you invited me to do with you.
Yeah, David crushed this episode.
We had a fun one.
So this is an example of how we execute an idea. David, as you all know, David has lost the smell of sense and taste. And yet he goes, and I've validated this firsthand also, to some of the finest restaurants in the world. And so I wanted to know why the you are doing that.
Stop swearing.
Oh, I'm sorry, Coca.
Thank you.
Why does he do this? Is this real? And it culminates beyond the, I think, beyond the genuine psychoanalysis that I always love to engage in with you. It got to the end of the show in which I asked Sean Evans, the host of Hot Ones, to send us the hottest hot sauces in the world, along with a video note. And I believe you're the only person on earth to ever do this. Sean told me he had never seen it. You almost, I believe the term might be blithely, just doused all of the wings.
Depressed me.
And could taste nothing, and then walked out. And it was one of the greatest flexes I've seen when it comes to just human performance. And also, I understand that the aftermath was painful.
So it turns out that you don't need taste or smell to have impacts south of the border. Yeah. Which is something I had not focused on, but all of that was true. So I encourage people, what if people have ideas? What is the best way? Because I assume you're going to run out of ideas at some point, and we can talk about the length of your contract and how you can convince everyone that you can find stuff out in perpetuity. But what if someone has something they want you to find out?
513-85-PABLO.
Say that again, please.
85-PABLO. 513-85-PABLO is a phone number you call. You leave a voicemail. We are I will not use the word desperate per hypothetical contract negotiations reference, but we are eager to hear from you because, yes, I am hopping from lily pad to lily pad until I drown, and I need good ideas. Nothing's more. My love language now is just story ideas.
Has there been a voicemail that led to an episode?
Yes, your episode was one of the episodes. But we have yes.
Okay, so I encourage people to do that. 513-85-PABLO. And believe me, I don't know that do you listen to the voicemails or your team of 75 people?
Okay, so others listen to them as well, but it's a Google Voice number, and I get in my personal email inbox a transcript and an audio file, and I listen to almost all of them. Unless I see the transcript and I'm like, I need to put this person in contact with like the FBI. Outside of that, I listen to all of them.
What's the rate of abuse of that number, 513-85-PABLO, versus people who actually you're like, whoa, this could be a story?
Yeah, I would say we get probably every 1 in 8 is a pretty good idea.
Wow. That's really good.
Yeah, people, it's because it's all about, hey, there's this thing that I've been wondering about forever. No one else has figured this out. Can you help me? And so I like to think of ourselves also as a detective agency for internet weirdos. And I consider myself one of them. And a lot of the other ones are just like people who are, and again, I appreciate this too. They're just like Stone being like, I love the show, man. love the show, and they just like ramble on until the
And
time
then hang
cuts
up.
off. No, until the time limit, and then I'm just like, cool. Glad I listened to that.
So you delete those, or are you keeping? I would like you to consider keeping all of the voicemails, and I assume they're in a cloud somewhere, because at some point it will make a great documentary. Because you're in the beginning, you're a year. When was the debut of PTFO?
It was September, the first week of September of 2023.
So we are almost at a year. Are you going to do anything to celebrate 1 year? It's not many shows last a year, I would
Yeah,
like to tell you.
yeah. We were talking about this. I think I want to give out awards. This is a thing
Like
I'm
to
soft
yourself?
launching exclusively, not to myself, but to people who've been on the show. I want to give out awards customized to them. And yeah, we have, to your point about like saving everything. We do save everything. We have stuff that we haven't ever used because we're trying to cut it down to be tight and lean in 50-minute episodes. But yeah, I have superlatives I want to give out. I have actual, like, I want to make trophies to hand to people as a way of sort of like reliving the last year.
So when you look back at the last year, and it's only been 11 months, what surprised you? Let's go positive and negative, but let's start negative and then positive. What surprised you to the downside as you've embarked on this show, and now you've seen it sort of, it's still an embryo, but maybe it's crawling now, not walking. I would think it's too early. I mean, in theory, you could do this for decades, but what surprised you to the downside?
What surprised me is simply how micromanagey I still am.
Mhm.
And I suppose this is unsurprising to anybody who knows me, but I sort of set up the whole premise of this to be like, I'm going to delegate more. I'm going to like build a team of handpicked people, and they're fantastic, except that I cannot take my hand off the steering wheel. And I presume lots of us who do this job are like this in their heart of hearts, if not on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, I
It's
find
your name in the marquee.
exactly. And we can talk about just the psychology of that too. But like, I find myself in Google Docs making tiny edits to things that no one else will notice, that I thought I might have evolved past, but it's my name on the marquee. And so I need to be better at that for the reasons of sustainability aforementioned, but I just can't stop doing it.
I will bet you $1, Mortimer, that you will not get better at that, because that is what makes you and you successful. And I would even go further and say, if you stop doing that, I think you should stop doing your show. Now, you can talk about workflow in terms of time off and in terms of vacation, but the attention to detail, I go through this all the time with Nothing Personal. I'm obsessed with it, and it impacts me, of course, because it impacts your life when you do a daily show. And it's your name on the show. But if I ever stopped caring, it's how I ended my baseball career. I mean, other than being fired, was that the losses hurt me more than the wins felt good.
Right.
And that is when I realized that was a major problem for me. And I think when you're doing your own show, if you find yourself not caring anymore about things that you're saying or doing, my guess is the juice won't be worth the squeeze.
Yeah. I think you are fundamentally correct. And you wanted a good thing as a related matter?
Surprise to the upside.
Yeah, that people would follow me down into rabbit holes, topics that they knew zero things about. Like they've done it with an eagerness that has surprised me. I knew that my hope was that they would do it, but the regularity of how often it happens now is what's been very rewarding, is that people have begun to trust that if I'm going to become obsessed with something, that they should at least hear me out on what that might be. And I mentioned fencing. I mentioned all these random topics, that are obscure. And I think the contagiousness of again, my authentic energy level, I'm so glad that has been resonating with people, and it's been rewarded.
Do you so you and I have been down some rabbit holes together.
Yes.
And both related to your show and related to Metal Arc, related to our personal lives, just rabbit holes. I love the rabbit hole.
I consult you a lot on background on things. I want people to also know that, even though I don't want to give away all of the secrets as to like how I am doing.
Well, except for the one time you gave it away.
Except for that.
When you quoted me without quoting
I
me.
did. Okay. So that's, I feel bad about that.
That was
for those who are on the scavenger hunt of the reference. I salute you if you get it. but that was hilarious in retrospect. God, it's
That
funny.
was one of the details that your people did that you didn't catch.
God, I am so guilty of that. It's so true. I was just praising myself for caring. I did the thing that
Took me 2 seconds to
that a
catch you,
bleep hole
Pablo.
does. What's your biggest weakness? I care too much. You know, I just love my job too much. And then you're like, what about the time when you did? I'm like, oh right, yeah. That was, I did not care
And that's
enough
just
that
off the
time.
top of my head.
Yeah, it's not encouraging for my credibility in this sit down. But I love that we have basically formed a newsroom. And what that means is that I'm actually making calls to people who know things. And you are one of those people. It's something that I need to do better at also as we do the sporting class together. You are not just valuable on that show because of your dynamic and chemistry, which I always praise with John Skipper. You are opposites in some key ways as well as more similar than people realize. You're also essential on that show because you are one of the most plugged in and fluent people when it comes to how rich people move and make decisions in the world of sports. There are things that you would not be obviously very aware of based on just on, oh, you ran the Marlins. Well, that's just over there. It's like, no, you know people and you know things, and I have been availing myself of that in the background as I like create a council of people that I genuinely trust to help me get smarter about stuff.
So the sporting class is the show that it started. I don't know if I just violated something, Coca. 4869. The sporting class is an idea that happened when I started with Metalark and was negotiating with Skipper and Dan, and they wanted a sports business podcast. And Dan wanted Skipper to do something because he used to run ESPN. And it started off with just John and I talking and doing shows together. And he and I discussed that it would be better if we could find a host, someone to help get more out of both me and John, who does it for a living, who's just better. And so we thought about it. And I remember the day I approached you about it, and you were interested. I wouldn't call you reticent. You were interested to hear more. You were willing to sit and host one of the episodes, but not willing to commit to being a part of the show because you didn't really know A, how you'd fit in, B, how you'd feel about it. And I remember exactly what you said. Let me see how interesting it is to me, and then how it would work into my workflow. And here we are months and months later, and you are now the third leg of the tripod. It is Skipper, Samson, and Torre, not necessarily in that order, who host this show called The Sporting Class that I would encourage people to check out because it's good. Do I have it right that that's how you started a little bit of reticence and now you are all in?
Yeah, it was basically like, hey, you just negotiated from 5 episodes a week to 3. Do you want to do this other thing as you're sort of getting your feet wet? And I candidly, I listened to the previous iteration of it with Chris Whittingham and was a fan of it. And so I was always I think the logic I ended up landing on after hosting one show with you guys was, oh, okay, so I'm going to want to listen to this. I might as well host it. Because I was just going to listen and be like, oh, I could have set that up, or I could have segued this way. I would have made fun of David or John there. One of the things I love is just that we all make fun of each other. And
we're not curing cancer.
And for people who think that there's a sort of self-seriousness to the premise of like, sports business, it's a very like dry subject. It is so the opposite to me, because you guys have juice on topics as well as knowledge, and we all laugh at each other. And that to me was the key ingredient of like, oh, I actually want to sit at this table with you guys, as opposed to just like being parasocially voyeuristic listening to it. So it was truly like a one and done thing. I was like, yeah, I should do this. And it's just a great pleasure that I genuinely get to indulge.
As we're heading toward, we both have a relationship with Dan on and off camera, and we understand what world we are in today and the issues we have. We are entering a particularly difficult period, I think, with the election coming in November. We're in a presidential election year, and it feels like it's taken on a different meaning this year. But although I assume that's recency bias because I probably said that in 20 and 16 and 12 and 8, etc. So how are you going to deal with, have you spoken internally, not just to your team, but to your own right brain about how you want to handle publicly the next 4 months?
Yeah, we talked about, we sort of look ahead on our calendar because we're always in production on episodes weeks and months, sometimes in advance. And so the question we had was, are we going to like blow out an election week of shows that are all about this thing? And the current position I have is I want to find one really good story that is differentiated, that is unique to us, that allows us in and allows us to touch the biggest story in the world.
Mhm.
But I don't just want to do it to do it. I truly dislike when anything related to politics feels obligatory, when it feels dutiful, when it's like, this is important. I'm a guy who wants to do important things. Let's make this important. That to me is just not what I want to listen to.
It is important. Hold on.
Right.
You doing an episode is not what makes it important.
No. But what I meant was, I don't want to make the episodes we do feel important because it feels like a duty to do important things. I wanted to do something in the end that allowed us to, to me, the lens that I take all of this through now is through stories, is through story ideas. So is there a way in that gives us an off-angle approach on something that people are probably going to be very, very tired of hearing about? That's my sort of journalistic North Star for this.
So as we head into the DNC, is there a thought that people would want to find out? So, for example, one of the things I do in Nothing Personal, so I want to caveat this and explain to people, you probably don't know where my politics are because some people think I'm conservative and some people think I'm liberal. It's very interesting to me because I try to be even-handed and educational and let people decide for themselves. One of the talking points around the DNC is how interesting it is that someone can be the presumptive Democratic candidate without actually votes having been cast for her in primaries. So one of the things that I think is interesting, I'd like to call 513-85 Pablo right now. So I'm going to quickly do it and say, hey, it's Samson. Can you find out how it is that someone can get the Democratic nomination without winning any of the primaries? Hey, get back to me. Thank you. Is that something you'd ever want to find out?
Yeah, but I think there's
an answer. Too political, too important, too not funny.
So of course, as always, like smart and funny is what the perfect sort of recipe ends up being. That one just feels like something that can be solved by a call to an expert, as opposed to, oh, let me invest time in sort of reporting that one out.
You mean the end of Joe Biden does not interest you? And how I was fascinated by all this because I thought it was entirely calculated. The way Obama's came out, then it was Pelosi, then it was Schiff, and then you had Jill hanging on by a thread, like hanging on to a dog by the leg. And then there were statements that were ready to go day of, and then there were statements the next day.
Oh, the TikTok of what actually was strategic as opposed to incidental is fascinating to me. By the way, I've been hoovering up all of this. Like my cable news, like political internet diet has been unhealthily consumed by all of this stuff.
Mhm.
I can't get enough of it. I was speaking more to just the procedural question about norms.
But that would be part of the show. So that would be in your do, and then it stops and you talk and you would say, all right, here's how this actually happened. But then you get back to your episode. I'm trying to produce an episode right now.
I love it.
It could be decent.
I think, look, there is something here. I think the question of how intentional was any of this is really interesting because in retrospect, we get to do the thing where we declare that it worked. So currently the last, however many weeks of Democratic resurgence, just from a purely horse race perspective, right? Leave aside the morality and the principles and the issues. Just talk about, okay, you're presented with this problem. And the problem is Donald Trump is surging right now, and he's about to speak at the RNC, right? I do believe that the calculus was made. We need to announce that Kamala Harris is the candidate after the RNC, after JD Vance is appointed, after we get through what felt like an insanely brief bit of attention paid to the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. once we can get through all of that, now we own the news cycle again. And there was so much of the leaking. And I think both of us are into this particular hobby of
Strategic leakerage.
leak detectives. I love being a leak detective because, like, okay, who did this? What was their incentive? How did they do it? How do they create the plausible deniability of it? And I do believe that Joe Biden, to the end, was deeply stubborn. This is just my personal theory. Now we're just in theory land, okay, for a second here. I believe that Joe Biden was deeply stubborn in the way, David, that an old hoss who doesn't want to give up the ball after 130 pitches in the ninth inning would be. He believes in a real way only he can win this game. What I believe has been the case the whole time, though, is that there has been more intensity of concern around, we're taking the ball out of this guy's hand. We're going to threaten that they're reporting semi-recently about the 25th Amendment being wielded as a cudgel as needed. I believe that it wasn't just Nancy Pelosi. I believe that lots more people around Biden were like, they were steeling themselves for what actually did happen in a way that I think belied how hard they fought via leaks and statements. I think all of this was not planned this way, but I think it was pursued this way once you realize that the RNC was happening. I think that was the big timeline.
So I think you're going to have to find out a few more things, because I think there's many twists and turns coming. And what people are doing is they're looking to you to not just inject humor, but to inject education. And I think this is an important topic. So I would expect some more episodes. So get on that.
Now you're my editor.
No, I want to be the voice on your left shoulder saying you've got a platform, use it the way you do. And I was thinking about
left shoulder, though. Interesting. Just write that down as we put your political matrix together. Yeah. Interesting.
It's quite a matrix. I want to talk about media a little bit because politics and media have never been so intertwined. And you have to go all the way back to Obama. Really, social media, my recollection of my life is that he probably is the first president to use social media well enough to win and to gain attention. And Kamala is she has a social media team that is doing great. There's she's winning the meme game. Look at me, I'm so old. Is it meme?
It's meme.
Is it meme?
Yeah.
So it's funny. Which group are you? Are you part of the old guard media, or are you young enough to be hip?
I came up through the journalism world with the olds. And so I have great nostalgia for the before times, but I'm also an Asian American millennial, which means that, yes, I identify with all of the millennialisms, but also because my skin is still good, I can present as Gen Z. That's my theory, is that I can get away with being in all of these categories. I look younger than I am.
Stop.
I know I read older than I am. What? Why?
You have to choose. I don't think you can live in both. No, I think the whole point of labeling generations is that you are who you are. If you want to adjust, at what point does it get creepy for an older person to go into a prom? It's creepy. So I don't think you can choose to be both. So I need you to choose one now. Which are you?
I am definitively a millennial. Definitively.
Okay. So when you look at social media and when you look at, I think, what have we seen recently? Skip Bayless has gone from undisputed.
Sure.
Streaming is a way of life. And we've talked about this on the sporting class on Nothing Personal, PTFO. Streaming is something that, while it wasn't contemplated decades ago, it is now here. The future is now. There are shows. There's a rumor that Around the Horn, which is a show that you've been on, could be taken off the air. McAfee, in theory, and his relationship with ESPN. My question is this: as I ponder the changes, how do you stay ahead of all of it and not feel like you're always playing catch up? Because I was born in '68. It's a lot of toggling when you're filling out forms. And I feel as though that I need coca every day and I use Coca every day for so many things. But one of the things is he's just not just more hip than I am. He knows more than I do about how to navigate these waters. That's why I think you have to firmly tell me which side you're in. Do you need help navigating any of this?
I have not yet needed a personal like meme taste tester. Where
Okay.
it's like, is this real? Is this poison? Can I drink this? Coca often dies in your service
He
because
does.
it's clearly like
Angrily.
a butt crack sports headline. I'm not there. Thankfully, I'm not there yet. I think my fluency is pretty good in terms of just spotting scams. But my grand theory of media is also fairly simple. I'll take a big picture first and get little picture all over the place if you want. It's simply that as media has declined as an economy, as it's been eaten by all of the forces that you've described, as Elon Musk is yet another character who rules this kingdom that we all get our disinformation from. It's also true that media has never been more important. And it's never been more valued by the people who seem to want to buy everything, but cannot buy the burnishing of their reputations. It feels like media has never been more clearly something that the richest people in the world thirst for the control of, and cannot totally get. And that is intoxicating to them. And it's not just Elon. It's Jeff Bezos by the Washington Post. It's everybody who is just on Twitter.
I think John Henry owns the Boston Globe.
The New York Times, right? Like the Boston Red Sox own a piece of the New York Times. So to me, it's all about a core human desire to manage your image and to manage your reputation and to feel like you are being appropriately heard. And as much as everything is eaten away at that, as an economic system that we once used to know that I am nostalgic for every day, cable news, newspapers, magazines, that's what I mean when I say I grew up with the old before times. I miss that stuff. It was better as an economy back then. But the thirst and the hunger has never been more desperate. And so for me, I know that media is going to be around forever. It's just the details are, of course.
You think the thirst and the hunger, Pablo? Because I think the industrialists way back in the 1920s, 30s, I think they probably had the same thirst and hunger. They didn't have the same means. There wasn't the technology. I think they wanted to take over the media world to that which it was at that point. Are you sure that the billionaires are different today than they were then?
I'm making a case less that they're different now and more that their hunger is eternal. So I believe you're right when it comes to, like, certainly the guys who were funding the newspapers back in the day. One of my favorite Disney movies is Newsies, so I know of which I speak.
Nice. I can picture you being in that movie.
It was my Halloween costume, my first Halloween costume in college.
So
was a newsie, and I would hand out
such a geek
student newspaper to people, and I would do barrel rolls. Yeah, look, I believe that for all time people have lusted after control of their reputation and information for the most obvious reasons. All I'm saying now is it's just funny when the people who are trying to tell you that media is dead and the enemy are the ones thirstiest for it. I think that as much as Elon hates the media, he thinks about nothing more than the media. And it's because the premise of the fourth estate, to be very briefly idealistic in a way that a newsie might be, it is that you are a check on something, that you are not controlled by the powers that be. And that idea, so to get around to your personal vantage point that you've asked for here, for me, my hope is simply that we can find at Meadowlark Media a business that supports our ability to be an independently minded voice. And
so
that's what I'm
in the 1 minute remaining, Pablo.
Oh man,
1 minute. That's it. DraftKings Network. You can see this show. Is that what makes Meadowlark so awesome and why we're here? Because we have an opportunity to do something that you may not have had at any other platform. And working with Skipper and Lebitard gives you the freedom, and I don't mean D-U-M-B, I mean D-O-M, and the resources where you say you want to be funny and you want to also not be too self-important. But isn't it true that exactly what you're doing and you've got 30 seconds for me. Aren't you happy right now?
Yes, we found, and by the way, with DraftKings, a corporate partner who has left me alone. It's just rare to find somewhere where they say, go do the thing you're interested in, and we're not going to get in your way. And so we are always threading needles, always trying to be self-aware about where's the money coming from, who are we working for. But the fact that our identity is premised in Dan Le Batard's insane and arguably
it's the perfect way to end.
Windmills like enthusiasm for freedom, it makes it clear what we're here for, and I'm glad to be here with you.